Welcome to Leaving a Legacy, Navigating Estate Planning with Rose Harper Law.
Hello and welcome to Leaving a Legacy, Navigating Estate Planning with Rose Harper Law. I'm your host, Sophia Morales, and I'm here today with owner Rose Harper to discuss blended families, unique challenges, navigating estate planning. So welcome, Rose. I'm so happy to have you here to discuss this important topic today.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. I actually have a blended family myself, so this is a topic important to me.
Yes, indeed. And it seems to be becoming increasingly common in today's society to have that second marriage, that second round of kids or steps or adopted children. So it's becoming something that you're going to have to probably deal with at some point. So what specific estate planning challenges does the blended family face that perhaps the traditional nuclear family may not be facing?
Yeah, so when you have a blended family, usually that means, that you have the parents within the marriage have had a prior marriage or they've had prior children before this marriage. So it doesn't, maybe you had a child and then got married later on to someone else, or maybe you had a prior marriage or you have adopted children along with biological children. There's some type of combination of, people within the family where it's not all just from the nuclear, marriage family. And in those situations, it is unique because what will happen is there might be assets that were obtained from a first marriage. And maybe those assets you don't want to be considered within your second marriage, or the assets within your current marriage, you want to make sure that your portion of those assets get given to, your children from your prior marriage. So there's a lot of variations that can occur. So you really need to sit down and speak with that particular family and find out, what is the family dynamic? What is the history there? What are their goals in terms of preserving their estate, and who do they want to get access to their assets, and how do they want those people to access them? So there's a lot of unique considerations, and particularly with blended families, it's so important to get that documented and to give people the legal authority to act to make sure that your wishes are followed. So I cannot emphasize it enough. My husband and I did our estate plan. I have a son from a prior marriage. There were no assets from that prior marriage. It was when I was really young. Um, but, I had my son from my prior marriage, and, my husband and I both felt like it was important that, we need to make sure that, my son from my prior marriage, will inherit from me, as well as we have two more children from our marriage. So we have three kids total, but we're a blended family, and we just wanted to make sure it's documented who gets what, when they get it. And, also I put in protections to ensure that all three of my biological children will receive from my inheritance, even if, God forbid, something happened to me and my husband remarried and had more kids.
Mm,
So there are
yeah.
things that can put into place in that situation too. So just kind of being forward thinking and, getting that plan into place today to protect your kids tomorrow. That's really the most important thing. And with blended families, it is unique, it is challenging, but there are ways to, get this done in a way that honors everybody.
I like that. I think probably having the conversation also sets some expectations for people moving forward. It helps to eliminate assumptions.
Yeah, that's one of the most important things that I speak with my clients about, that yes, we're getting this plan in place, but really you need to communicate with the people who need to know about this plan to avoid that conflict. So the communication part is key.
So, how can blended families ensure that it reflects the interests of all the parties involved, whether it's biological, adopted, stepchildren?
So in going through the process, it kind of depends on which plan you're working on. So if you have a will-based plan or you have a trust-based plan, there might be different opportunities to ensure that your assets get distributed in accordance with your goals, right? So the other thing that you can do, there's a lot of different options. So you can have a single distribution. Say, for example, you have children from a prior marriage and they're much older. It's actually my situation. And, even though most of my assets are going to go into say, for example, an irrevocable trust for all three of my children. But maybe I want to ensure that a specific distribution of a certain amount immediately goes to my older child. That can help alleviate any feelings that might be had if they feel like money is getting held back from them. It just kind of like takes the pressure off. They've
Yeah.
they're already receiving an immediate distribution that's going directly to them. That'll help them in the immediate, and then, as the estate is getting settled out, it'll all get resolved, in the back end. But you can do things like that with an immediate initial single distribution just to kind of calm everything down, because usually, if something happens, there was probably an emergency, right? So, and then there's other options too, like even within the trust design, you can have separate trusts be established immediately, or it can be a common trust that gets separated out at a certain age of the children. So it really depends on your specific family, everyone's ages, and where everyone is at. That's why for blended families in particular, going to some online service or someone who uses a template, that's not that's not a good idea. You really wanna seek out professional help from an estate planning attorney to make sure that your plan accomplishes what you want it to accomplish and will actually work when your family needs it. So that's what I do.
Well, and we kind of brushed up against my next question earlier, but I think it bears a little more digging into. How do you recommend addressing potential conflicts among the family members involved when you're dealing with this blended estate plan?
Yes. So for blended families, there's a heightened risk of conflict, meaning that your family can get into litigation over, who they think should get certain assets, or if they feel like someone's being left out. But to truly avoid that conflict, having your wishes documented is the first most important step. So either getting your will-based plan done or getting your trust-based plan done. Usually the trust-based plan for blended families is better because it gives you a lot more options of things that you can do and protections that you can put into place, but not everyone does that. Some people do the will-based plan, which is fine as well. My whole thing is like, document what you want to happen, because if you do not, everyone's family and your prior spouse and their family and everyone's going to come into the mix, and it's going to get fought out in court and waste a lot of money that doesn't need to be spent. If you just take the time now and invest in documenting what you want to happen and establishing that relationship with an attorney. So that's the other thing I talk to potential clients about, like, or even people like, I'm a part of certain networking groups and I connect with people across the country, and even very educated people are like, "Oh, I'm trying to do like my will online." I'm like, "You what are you doing?" Like, establish a relationship with a local attorney, because then I'm going to have all my notes from every meeting we've had. So if your family goes to court to try to challenge one of your decisions, I'm going to be there to say, like, no, this is what their wishes were. Like, we thoroughly discussed this. And, so it's really important to establish that relationship and make your wishes known to avoid conflict. Get your wishes documented and with legal authority. So having it done properly by an estate planning attorney is the best way to avoid conflict. And then also communicating with people now in real time about what you've documented, or sometimes even just letting them know, listen, I got my estate plan done. I created a trust. I'm not going to discuss the details of it with you, but I want my wishes honored. I made this plan. This is what I want. Because that can kind of alleviate, like, if there's something in there that your family wasn't expecting, they can remember that conversation they had with you. That, no, you actually really thought this out. You invested in this, and this is what you wanted, and they have to live with it.
So, where do wills and trusts fit into this, especially when like the family dynamics change? There's a remarriage or divorce or new kids.
Everyone is different and everyone wants something different. I think particularly when you have a blended family, making sure that the basic authority. So if you're married to someone and they're a step parent, well, and like for in certain situations, maybe the biological parent is no longer in the picture, or they're gone with the wind, and the step parent is the one who's really helping raise the children, but they probably don't have legal authority to act as a parent. And so by getting your plan done, you can actually give them legal authority if you wanted to, or whoever you want to give legal authority. Maybe you give it to your parents who live down the street, but at least giving someone the legal authority to act, to care for your children so they don't have to go to, temporary housing or state housing or something like that. But really getting that documented and in place. A lot of people don't consider that or think of that. It's like, well,
Well, of course, it would be my spouse who would raise the kids. It's not a given.
correct. It's
Yeah.
not. And so it's really, really important to get that legal documentation in place.
How can you utilize a trust to provide for your kids, especially if you're dealing with like children from previous marriages and like a current set of joint children? How can you make that work to get equitable treatment for everybody involved?
Well, I just saw a viral social media clip, so I'll kind of touch on that. It was a couple, and for whatever reason, they were discussing, assets. And it came up that the wife or future wife had a prior marriage and she had kids from that prior marriage. And I think she probably got a lot of assets from that prior marriage that were put into a trust for
Ah,
her to use raising the kids and then to go on to the kids. And I would imagine based upon what she said, because she said, "Well, all of my assets from my prior marriage, you don't have access to them, and they're not going to you. We can build within our new marriage, and those assets will be ours, but my assets from my prior marriage are for my children." And I think she said that very specifically, which was smart because I'm assuming her and her ex-spouse were on top of things. When you have a good amount of money, you wanna make sure that that money goes to your kids and doesn't go to your spouse's future spouse. So
yes, exactly.
it's very important. Oh, look, I'm getting a thumbs up. The online system agrees with me. But, no, so basically what you can do is you can put protections into place in your trust to prevent future spouses from getting access to the money that you worked your lifetime for to pass on to your kids. So even if you get a divorce and your spouse moves on and marries again, that money is preserved for your children. It's really, really important. And
Yeah, I think sometimes we forget about like future players that might come on the stage after we leave, right? Because it's
yes.
easy to go, well, of course he's going to take care of my kids and treat them equitably. And then there's this new wife down the road and the dynamics change.
The dynamics change a lot, and I think what people don't realize is maybe you had a 30-year marriage, but if you passed away first and you've been passed on for 15 years, unfortunately, it's out of sight, out of mind, and
Yeah.
now you have people getting remarried at 70, 80 years old, and they're forgetting that your spouse worked their whole lifetime to give that money to their kids, and you're trying to give it to your new spouse.
Yeah.
So there are so many things that come up in life and you just don't know. Even if you fully trust your spouse right now, like you said, there can be outside influences. So their next spouse, might not have the best intentions or might just not realize like, no, that money is for the kids, not for you to live off of. So it's really important to get those protections in place and a trust can really help accomplish that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've brushed up against communication previously, but I think I want to go down this road again. What role does the communication and transparency play in creating an effective state plan for a blended family as opposed to something that ends up in the courts?
Yeah. Well, honestly, I feel like for any family, like any of my clients, even if it's not a blended family situation, you should have open communication. Maybe you're not giving a specific monetary amount that certain people are getting, but you should be honest. Like, if you create your plan and something's different about it, you might want to let that be known because otherwise, anyone withstanding, so any potential heir can petition the court and challenge the decision making. There are certain requirements for them to challenge that, but I think by opening the communication can kind of alleviate that risk. And make your plan even more secure. And like I said, you don't have to give the exact specifics of like, oh, you're getting $10,000 and I'm giving 1 million to your sister, but you can at least you could have a conversation because sometimes what happens is, for example, in a setting like that, even just a regular family, right? Not a blended family. But with any family, you might have a situation where, well, one child was a single parent for 10 years and, we provided for them and their child, bought them a car, whatever the case may be, right? So maybe there's a certain amount of money we know we spent to one child during their lifetime. And
Right.
maybe in our estate plan, we want to account for that and give more to a sibling to make it even.
Right.
But
Yeah.
by opening those conversations and just saying, "Look, we helped you out a lot during your lifetime. We think we spent about X amount of money. We're gonna even it out, on the back end," can really help ensure that no one's feeling hurt and, everyone understands why.
Right. There's no ugly surprise after you pass away. So, what should we consider when we have a blended family and we're creating this plan and designating like an executor or a trustee to manage affairs? I know it's easy to go, oh, well, we'll have the responsible child do it. But what are some of the pitfalls?
Well, it really depends on the ages of, your kids and where everyone's living. So if you have an adult child who lives all the way across the country, that might not be the best person to be the executor of your will because your will still has to go through the probate court. So,
Mm.
sometimes what I have happen is I had a couple, they're adults, they have their own kids, they're working, they live in New Jersey. Well, their parents passed away in Florida. They thought that by putting their bank accounts as transfer on death, that would, transfer that account to their spouse. But one spouse died first and the other spouse forgot to change that.
Oh, no.
That account now has to be probated in Florida. So now the adult kids working full time with their own kids are having to go through the court system in Florida. It's very stressful. So people need to consider that as well. You really want to think about, well, who could take on this role? Is it reasonable for me to expect them to do that? We talk about logistics, like where are people living, what's going on in their lives. So those are all important considerations.
Very good. So we're down to the tail end of our conversation here today, Rose. This has been very informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And thank you to all the viewers out there for tuning in to Leaving a Legacy, Navigating Estate Planning with Rose Harper Law. To connect with Rose and her team, head over to roseharperlaw.com. And we'd love it if you would like, subscribe, and review because it helps us with the algorithm and pops this up to help additional people who need this information. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.